How would you like to be 30% better at everything that you do?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Coach Tribe podcast. Today, we have with us a very special guest, Tony, and I guess, he is a surprise. You're going to see why. So, before I spoil it for you, I guess I'm just going to say hello to Tony and just say welcome to our podcast.
Well, hello, Maria. It's a pleasure to be here. And, I just want to say that to everyone listening, that as we begin this journey together, I'm not sure which points you're going to hear today that you might stop and think of how much value you've truly gotten. But as that's taking place, I just want to say that I am honored to be the person leading you on this journey and learning how to communicate better with those around you.
I think we are really lucky to have you here, Tony. And I think the insights that you have and the topics that we're going to discuss are really unique, I would say. And now I guess I would ask you, why are they unique? What is special about you, Tony? And maybe, yeah, what are we going to talk about today?
Right. Well, before I tell you a little bit about me, which I'm going to do, I just want to ask a question. Have you ever walked into a situation where you felt that you could have done a better job in persuasion and influence? Maybe during a sales presentation or even with a family member. Today, we're going to talk about some great tools to increase your persuasion and influence by over 30%. Now, I'm not going to be able to share everything, but I hope that what you learned today is something that you can take with you. And I also want to preface this by saying you have to have the right heart behind it. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. But I am currently a speaker, trainer, and coach. And I became a coach in 2020. But before that, I was in a different world. I was an investigator, and I did that for many, many years. I still have a private investigator's license. So I learned a lot of this persuasion stuff in the world of investigations. And if you think about sales and investigations, when you're interviewing somebody, when you're taking a confession is the hardest sale that you will ever make because you're trying to get the bad guy to tell you, yes, not only did I do it, but I'm going to tell you why, and I'm going to admit to that. And not only did we used to do that, and I trained my investigators to do that, but also to get a thank you after they confessed.
I'm just here listening right now, and that I actually like that you gave this example because I never thought about it like this. And I would then ask you, how did you move from this field of investigation to this world of coaching?
Well, that's an interesting question, Maria. It was in 2019. I had thought about getting out of the investigation world because to be frank, it's a great career, but it's a negative world. It's a very negative world because you're dealing with bad people, usually doing bad things. Now, it wasn't really where my soul was aligned. And, have you ever felt where if you're not aligned with something, you need to move on? And that's exactly where I was in my journey. And to make a long story short, I ended up in 2020 after the COVID pandemic hit. I got a coach and I found out that coaching was something that I was aligned with. And I've always liked and loved teaching. So that's kind of what sent me in the direction. But I love the fact that I can use the same psychology. I can take that psychology out of the dark side and help to shine a light in the world.
Love that, and really grateful that, in a way you decided to make this shift because right now you're here with us, and I'm really grateful for that, especially because today we're going to learn from you how to use the power of persuasion and influence to actually grow our coaching business, whether that is to generate leads, whether that is the way that you show up in your coaching calls. I have a feeling that you're gonna help us, become better at those things. And yeah, am I right?
I'm sure every single person listening today, I'm confident that you will walk away with something that you can use in your business to help grow your business. So I just want to get started by a little exercise before we get started. I want everybody listening, if you can, now I don't know if you're where you are right now, but if you can, I want you to stand up or stand up straight. Now I'm sitting down, but that's because I need to stay on camera. Stand up straight and get into what they call a power pose. Now, if you're not familiar with power poses, go Google it. Amy Cuddy, Cuddy. She does a better job explaining the science than I do. But a power pose is like Wonder Woman pose, Superman pose, or the victory pose. Here's the thing. When you stand in that pose for more than 2 minutes, your testosterone increases and your cortisol levels go down, both by about 20%. So what does this give you? It gives you more confidence. And confidence is the key. Certainty is the key. When you have absolute certainty, and I want you to think about a time in your life when you felt absolute certainty, and stand the way you stood, or if you're sitting, sit the way you sat. And you'll notice that you raise your chest up. Your solar plexus is just a little bit higher. It's that confident posture. And when you assume that posture, you have a hard time feeling disheartened. You have a hard time feeling fear. So get into that confident position and feel that certainty, because in any situation, especially in sales, the person who has the most certainty wins. I'll say it again, write it down. The person with the most certainty wins. And what confidence is, certainty plus comfort. So I'm going to tell a little story about a TV show that some may be familiar with. I hope you're all familiar with it. It's an old show from like the 1960s. It's called The Andy Griffith Show. And if you're familiar with that show, the character that Andy Griffith played was the sheriff of the town, and he was a sheriff without a gun. And he was just kind of a regular guy. But see, he was one of the best TV cops ever because he was comfortable at who he was. And I want you to think about times in your life when you felt comfortable, like going into an expensive store. Have you ever gone to maybe a car dealership and you know you can't afford the vehicle? Maybe you go to a Mercedes-Benz dealership or Ferrari and you're looking at these cars, and if internally you feel like you don't belong there, then you won't be comfortable. But the important thing is when you're going into a sales situation is you have to be comfortable in that situation.
The Code Tribe podcast is powered by Pensight. I want to take this opportunity to tell you more about Pensight and how much value it can provide you and your coaching business.
Pensight is an all-in-one platform for coaches and educators that enables you to quickly and easily build a highly credible page and sell your knowledge with one-to-one sessions, group coaching, courses, Q&As, digital products, and bundles. Payments, scheduling, video calling, client communications, and everything else is taken care of.
All it takes is 5 minutes to set up, and it's free. It's the smartest way to kickstart your coaching business. Sign up to Pensight today at pensight.com.
Totally. And I love the fact that you give us this practical examples, because I feel like it's easy to go broad about with these topics, but I would actually ask you throughout this episode to keep giving us this practical example, something that we can actually take and use after this episode as well, because I think, this really makes a difference. Now,
Yes.
Tony, we are already, like getting into the water, but before we do that and before we learn more about persuasion and influence, I want to ask you why this field of psychology, these topics of persuasion and influence, why are this useful for coaches? Why is this something we should even care about, and what impact can they have on our life and business?
Being able to influence people and persuade people is really, if you're going to treat your coaching like a business, and it is a business, right? You need to know how to think like a business. You need to have to understand that you're in business, and we're in business to make money. We're in business to make sales, but we're also in the business of helping people. And the ability to persuade and influence will not only help us increase our sales, increase our finances, but it will also help the people that we serve. And Maria, you brought up a great point, and I want to put this out in the very beginning. Every single technique that we talk about today, you can use on the dark side. You can use it for your own self-interest, your own gain. But if you do that, I believe in karma, and it's going to come back to you. it's going to come back to you in the negative way. I believe we have to go into this with the right heart. And the right heart, I believe, is to sow seeds of greatness in people. Because everyone, including you watching, listening to this, you have seeds of greatness in you. And I want to tell you a quick story about a teacher. The teacher sat down with her kids in her class, her students, and she told the students on a piece of paper, write down the names of every single person in the class. And next to that person, I want you to write down one thing that you really like about that person, maybe in one word or less, or one word anyway. Write down something good about that person. So that was the exercise. So everyone in the class did it. And the teacher went home and took everything that those people wrote. And for example, if you were in the class, Maria, they would have written down things about you. So I would have wrote out a piece of paper, Maria, and then wrote all of those words that all those people, all those kids in that class had written down about you. And the next morning, she gave those papers out to all of the students, and the students read those, and they were surprised at some of the things people said about them. And it made them feel really good. It made them feel confident. It made them understand that inside of them were seeds of greatness. Well, years later, a tragedy happened. One of the boys in the class grew up. He was in the military, and he was killed in the line of duty. And at his funeral, the teacher showed up, and the father of this student told the teacher that on his possession, when he passed away, was that piece of paper with the names, with his name and all of those characteristics that he had. It had meant so much to him that he kept it with him. And you know what? He wasn't the only one, because some of his classmates were at that funeral and they had the same piece of paper with them, or they were telling stories about how they put them in a drawer somewhere or posted them in their office. So the words that we speak to people are important, and helping people to show those seeds of greatness in their life, which is what we do as coaches, has more value, and we need to be doing it. So whenever you go into influence and persuasion, keep in mind that you always have the person's best interest at heart. Does that make sense?
Totally. And I have to admit that I did have goosebumps at the end of the story. It's a powerful story. And I think it only goes to remind us of how some little things can influence someone's life so much. And whatever skills we develop, I hope we're all going to use them the best interest of ourselves, of this world, and with good intentions. Okay, cool. Now that we know that, I want to ask you, Tony, what are some of these exercises that we can use when it comes to persuasion and influence, and how can we use them? Like, in what context? For example, do you have an exercise before going on a maybe webinar or call with a bigger audience? Do you have any exercise for showing up on video, recording reels? Like, how can we integrate these exercises in our life?
Mhm.
And what are these exercises?
Well, those types of exercises have to do with just getting into the right state. Because, and this really speaks to persuasion and influence, because we have to be able to control our state first if we expect to control another person's state. We have to be able to walk out confidently. You know, if you've ever seen someone like Tony Robbins, he, before he goes on stage, and he comes out on stage with as a ball of energy, he's jumping around going, yes, yes, yes. Before he goes on stage, he used to do incantations, and I believe he still does. So getting into the right state is important. But I want to ask a question as I segue into this. How would you like to be 30% better at everything that you do? Would that be something that you'd like to learn today?
Count me in. I want to become 30% better.
30% better. Very simple. And this comes from the dark side, because it comes from FBI researchers. What they found out is if you take everything that you learn and you have a more playful, experiential learning attitude, the FBI researchers found that if the hostage negotiator, and how many think hostage negotiations would be a stressful situation, right? If the hostage negotiator goes in with a more fun and playful, let's see what happens attitude, he was actually 31% more likely to be successful. And that success was in all areas. He was more likable, he was more creative, more intelligence, more resourceful. And one of the things I've learned in life is it's not the resources that count, it's our resourcefulness. So he had more resources. They made better decisions than their counterpart, and their counterpart was even more compliant. So all they had to do was go in with this playful, let's see what happens attitude. So if we approach everything in life with that attitude, we can truly increase our success rate by 30% automatically. The other thing is you need to be invested, not just interested. So what do I mean by that? If you're learning, you got to be willing to make mistakes. You got to become interested in your outcome, but become invested in your learning. So that means you're interested in what happens, what your outcome is, but you're more invested in the learning. So at the end of this learning today, I'm going to teach you the most influential way to have people know, like, and trust you and feel totally comfortable with you. Does that make sense?
100%. And I'm super excited to hear more about it.
So it all starts in neuroscience. I became interested in something called NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming, and I'm basically a psychology geek. I read psychology textbooks for fun. And I learned about the triune brain. And if you're not familiar with the triune brain, Dr. Paul MacLean was one of the authors of, I believe that's a book. He talks about how our reptile brain, our oldest part of the brain, makes all the decisions. See, we have three brains. We have your cerebral cortex on the outside, which is the thinking brain. We have your neocortex, your emotional brain, and then inside that reptile, that fight or flight brain. And the fight or flight, the reptile makes all the decisions. And every time we make a decision, we use our external brain, the cerebral cortex, to rationalize those decisions that we made. They're already made for us. So in learning NLP, one of the ways we can persuade and influence people is to speak directly to that reptile. So everything we do has a structure, and language is the way we shape that structure. Again, this is what John Grinder and Richard Bandler learned when they founded NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming. There are 5 ways we communicate. And this is one of the things that Grinder and Bandler talk about. Visually, auditory, kinesthetically, and then there's 2 others. And basically they are your sight, your hearing, your kinesthetic, your feeling, your smell, and your taste. But smell and taste we don't really have to worry about. But when we talk to people, we need to realize that some people speak in more visual terms, some people speak in more auditory terms, and some people will speak in more kinesthetic. Have you ever heard someone say, well, it feels like you're not listening to me, or it feels like, or it sounds like, or maybe the way I see it? These are all words that will help you to learn what a person's way of communication, their primary way of communication is. Now, a lot of NLP people sit down and they drill that. And when I'm teaching an NLP seminar, I will drill some of that. But I think if you learn to recognize if that person is a visual, auditory, or kinesthetic person, or if you learn to use all those words in your language. So one of the things when I'm getting an objection, I will say to them, well, it sounds like you don't understand what I'm talking about here, or it feels like, and I try to interject sounds, feels, or the way I see it. I try to interject those words because if I use all those words, I'm going to hit that person's primary language. So again, that's a little bit technical. It's probably the most technical that I'm going to get today.
Before you go into these 3 rules, I am super interested to find out. So first of all, I think it's very interesting to know, about these fields and how they all come together and how we can use them to our advantage and to the people's advantage, because it just makes the communication run smoothly. When it comes, let's say, to creating reels or like virtually, so you're not in the same room with the person, how can you tap into the kinesthetic field? How can you trigger that language? Is it through the words? Like you said, you just use the idea of feel, sense. So is it just words
Mm-hmm.
that cut it? Or like, do I
Yep.
actually have to interact with them in real life?
What I would say to do is to use those words, use all of the sensory words, use your visual words, use your auditory words, and use kinesthetic words, and just kind of mix them up in any of your persuasion. So that's a great question, Maria, because when you're doing reels and videos, you want to use all those words. You'll find that you have a primary language that you use. In fact, if you go and watch some of your old videos or listen to yourself speak, you'll notice those words will come out. So what I would do for a time saver is just Google visual words, kinesthetic words, auditory words, and keep that list, and then just learn to use those words and interchange them when you're making your videos. Because that way, if a person speaks in that language, if you're a visual person and you're speaking to an auditory person, sometimes you may not gel. But if you intertwine all of the words for all three languages, then no matter who you're talking to, you're going to be able to at least hit them at some point. Does that make sense?
Totally. And I think I'm seeing it also with social media now. I've been into
Okay.
content creation for a while. And it's so true that it seems that, content performs so much
Yes.
better when you tap into these different fields. So let's say I do a video where I talk, so I use this audio bit. But if I'm able to also show what I'm talking about, like that's already the next level. So I love how what you says
Yeah.
just like
Yes.
literally breaks this down for me. Now before we go into those three rules, Tony, there's something that stayed with me from earlier on in our conversation where you mentioned about you were talking about having that playful attitude in what you do, and we jumped to the next topic. But before the
Yes.
before going to those rules, I actually want to ask you, how do we bring that playful attitude? I know you mentioned, going back to some childhood memories, but how do we actually do it? Like, do we have to visualize it, close our eyes? Like, what is one exercise that can help us bring that playful attitude?
I really believe that if we just get curious about people, try to get curious about what that person is thinking, why they're thinking that way, but do it in because playfulness and curiosity kind of go hand in hand. And the attitude of let's see what happens next. That is a great way not only to deal with your interactions, but to live your life, right? A bold desire to see what happens next. When you're a child, you have that desire to go out and see what happens next. And that's an example. When somebody throws us an objection, I view that as them throwing me a ball. And my job is to toss that ball back to them and make them have fun. And we're going to have a playful exchange. It's really a mindset thing more than anything else. Getting that into our mindset. Don't be too serious. Don't make this too serious.
I was wondering, this idea of don't take yourself too seriously, is this something that fits in here as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, don't take yourself too serious because we all do, right? Especially when we have something important that we want to help in the coaching world. I mean, we health coaches, let me just use that as an example. If you're a health coach and you're working with someone and you know that you can improve their health, if they were to work with you, you can help them to lose the weight, to get their blood work and all their numbers better. Maybe, their high blood pressure, get that under control. If they're a diabetic, get their diabetes under control. You have some very serious issues there, but don't take yourself too seriously going into it. You're another human being and you're going to learn about this other human being and look at the interaction that way.
I love it. Love it. Okay, now I am ready to move to the next chapter and those three rules. Before that, can you tell us once more, like what's the end goal of these three rules and what will they help us with?
Basically, these are three rules of selling and persuasion. So they will help us in a sales situation and where we have to persuade someone to either our way of thinking or basically when you're selling someone, when you're negotiating with someone, what you're doing is you're getting them to see things your way. So rule number one, as I was saying, is that you're not selling a product or a service. What you're really selling is decisions and good feelings about the decision, because the decision that somebody makes to buy something, the decision without those good feelings, that's going to bring in something called buyer's remorse. And depending on what you're selling, it could also mean bad reviews on places like Yelp. So the formula here is decision times good feelings. That equals something we also have called referrals. So anytime that we're selling a product or a service, we're looking at their decision to purchase that product or service and to feel good about it. So that's rule number one.
I just love the perspective.
It's a different perspective. And a lot of this stuff, if you think about it, they're common sense, but most people don't look at it that way. So rule number two is whatever you can get your prospect to imagine for themselves, they will perceive it as their own thoughts and they will not resist. So an example of that will be to, let's say you're selling a car, and I'm just using this as an example. If you can get your prospect to imagine what it would be like for them to be driving that car and the feelings they would have when they drive that car, because a lot of it has to do with their emotions. If they start thinking about what it would be like rather than you telling them, then they will perceive it as their own thoughts, which that's because it is, and they won't resist that decision. They won't resist the decision to want to purchase that car in the example that I gave.
Before we go into the third rule, give us an example of how we can make people imagine. Is it just like this? I want you all to close your eyes and imagine this. And yeah, where do we say this? Is it in a webinar? Is it in a workshop? Like, where do we say it and how do we say it?
I'm going to, as we go along today, I'm going to give you a couple more techniques that will help you with that. But when we're asking people, like, let me use coaching, asking questions like, what would it be like if? That's a great question. What would it be like if you were able to lose 20 pounds within the next 60 days? What would your life be like? And if you were to work with me, one of my favorite questions as a coach is to tell them at the end of the presentation, or at the end of my discovery call. That's what we use a lot in the coaching world. At the end of this discovery call, I'll say, now I want you to think about something. I want you to imagine we've worked together for a year. At the end of that year, I want you to imagine that you had the best life possible and you were able to implement all these changes. What would life be like for you? So there's two things you're subtly putting into the picture. You're saying, we've worked together for a year. Now we put that out there, but that's not what they're focusing on. Now they're going to talk about the things in their life that will become better. But what they're going to imagine for themselves at that point is those things are better because they worked with you for the year. Does that make sense?
Totally. And I'm so happy you actually gave us, like detailed example, because I'm sure that many of us will take it and implement it. It just makes sense. And I think it's a great reminder to focus on the results and the feelings rather than the features. I feel like one of the biggest mistakes I see is that people describe the product, how many lessons you have, how many coaching calls, how many, I don't know, ebooks, materials. When the difference comes when you're able to portray the image of what this program can do for you and where this program can take you. And I think it's a great reminder, and I'm so grateful that you're putting this out there today, because it
Yes.
really can make a difference like this once you see it and once you start implementing that. Now, super interested
Yes.
in rule number 3.
Rule number 3 is basically this. Selling is about triggering your prospect's own buying process, because everyone has a process that they go through when they buy, but we don't know what that process is. So we have to learn how to trigger that process without knowing what it is. And the way we do this is by using vague language to get the prospect to fill in the blanks with the details. And vague language is something great because, again, you may not know and I'm going to go back to coaching, what your coaching program, what exactly they're looking for. But if you use vague language, they'll fill in the blanks. Like when I ask someone, imagine that you just had the most successful career, or you had the most successful year of your life, or imagine you found the career that was absolutely perfect for you in every detail. Well, what are those details? You don't know what they are, but your prospect knows. So they're going to fill in those details when you use vague language. So that's why there's a time to get specific when we're telling them, about how much the coaching program is going to cost. But there's also a time where we need to be vague.
And can you give us can you give us an example, like where do you use this vague language? Like, is it in the discovery call? Is it on a workshop at the end of webinar? Like, how do you get this out of them?
We can use that in pretty much everything that we do, unless we're dealing with something that has a specific catered outcome. We can use vague language in those discovery calls. We can use them in a webinar. We can use them because we don't know exactly what nuggets your prospect is that's going to resonate with them more. So when you use vague language, again, it allows them to fill in the details. Say I'm a dating coach and I'm working with someone and I'm telling them that by the end of this 90 days, you will know exactly the things that you want in that person who you want to spend the most time with. You'll know all those characteristics that make you feel good on the inside. You'll know the characteristics that truly resonate with you, and you'll know those conversations, those great conversations that you have with someone that you've always wanted to have. You'll be able to find the person to have those conversations with. Now, what have I really said there? What have I told them about the person that they're going to meet?
You tell me.
I really didn't really tell them anything specific. Those conversations, the feelings that they feel, the characteristics that they have, they're filling in the details themselves. So that's where we're being vague. Does it clarify that for you a little bit, Maria?
Yes. So will they put it out to you, or is it just in their head? Will they disclose this in writing or in talking with you,
Sometimes
or is it just
they'll disclose it in the conversation, which is great because when we know the details, then that's fine. And when we get to our technique later, that's going to really come into play. But for the time being, when you're first talking, it's always good to use vague language. And I'll give you some more
gotcha? So
examples as we go along.
yeah, that's what I wanted to say. If you can give us like one more example of how this vague language looks like. Just give me an example from maybe what you use, or like how does it sound? Like, I don't know, a
Okay.
sentence or like a scenario.
Well, maybe when you were a child and you were selling something like candy bars. What do most kids say when they knock on the door? Hi, you want to buy a candy bar? My school is selling them. It's just something really simple. But if I were to knock on the door and say, Hi, I'm Tony. I'm here to sell you something. Hold up the candy bar. It tastes really good, and you'll get to feel good while you eat it because it's helping out the school, and that makes the whole neighborhood a better place to live. Now think about that for a minute. It tastes really good. I've just told them the obvious. What do they like about it? Do they like it because it's chocolate? Do they like it because of the texture? It doesn't matter. I'm telling them that it's a candy bar, so of course it tastes really good. And then I'm also saying you'll get to feel good while you eat it. Well, feel good about what? Because it tastes really good? No, feel good because they're helping out the school, and that makes the whole neighborhood a better place. Well, how does it help out the school? Well, they'll fill in those details. How does it make the neighborhood a better place? By helping the school. They're going to fill in the details because the kids are better educated. So the kids are out selling candy bars, so they're not out in the neighborhood causing trouble. Whatever those details are, they're going to fill those things in. And you talked about feature based versus emotion based. So what we want to do in that situation is someone will offer an objection like, oh, I'm sorry, I already bought one. Or I'm sorry, the kid down the street sold me one. When they say I already bought one, what I would say in that case is, well, of course you did. And that's because you're a generous person who likes to make a difference. But I can only give you two because the guy down the street, he already told my dad that he wants to buy five. So again, what have I done there? I've said he's a generous person, so I've set the expectation and that he likes to make a difference. Now, how is he going to make a difference? By buying the candy bar. And I also threw in another thing there. I said, I can only give you two because the guy down the street told my dad that he wants five. So I've added something called scarcity, which is a whole other tactic. And there's a lot of things we could get into, and I'm not even going to get into scarcity today, but basically that just means that whenever you're selling something, that you're not giving away something. It's not unlimited. When you're selling your coaching, you only have so many slots available. That gives you a scarcity mentality. And you can be vague about it because you don't have to tell them exactly how many spaces you have. So I know we went down a little path. I tend to be ADD boy. Sometimes I go down different paths, but I hope that helps clarify, what I meant a little bit by the vague language, and also gave you another example how to use this technique.
Definitely. And I think it just was also a reminder for at least when you have maybe a smaller capacity coaching program. So we're not talking about tens or hundreds of clients. When you have that time to have discovery calls, I think another important thing that I'm seeing is when you have coaches, throughout the discovery call, talk about their program and the features and the benefits and everything, but they really forget to know, or they don't know to actually learn more about who's there with them in the meeting, like about your client, and figure out who are they, what are they looking to get out of it. And I think what you're saying was a reminder for me, for coaches to avoid this mistake of, just talking about your program, when actually what you want to do is learn more about your clients so that you can then tailor your program for their needs. And I think this just came when you were presenting the free rules.
Yes, the more we learn about our client, again, like we said, the more we go in with that curiosity, that bold desire to know what happens next and know more about the person that is in front of us. The more we come off with that curiosity and that playfulness, the more of a chance we're going to have to build that connection with that person.
Now, just before we wrap up, Tony, what's one technique or one thing you want to leave us with today?
I'm going to give you, as we close out today, my very favorite technique. And this is something that you can incorporate in not only your business or your coaching, but communication in general. Now, it's so obvious, and sometimes people will hear it and they'll go, oh my goodness, this could not work. But let me tell you what it is. It's called the echo technique, because the most powerful words that any human can hear are the words that just came out of their own mouth. You don't have to believe it right now as I tell you that, but go into the world and use it. So, Maria, let me demonstrate this in the few minutes that we have left with you. So, we're having a conversation. And I want you to tell me during this conversation or at the end of it how you felt. So, let's say that we just met and I say, "Hi, Maria. Yeah, it's great to meet you. What brings you to this event that we're at?"
Hi, Tony. Great to meet you too. Honestly, it's all about the inspiring people for me and, seeing other people shine their light bright.
I love it when I see other people shine their light, because really it's all about inspiring people for me. What about inspiring you really makes a difference in your life?
I think it's the idea of unlimited potential because I feel like inspiration can open that world of possibilities for us.
Yes, unlimited potential. And it does, it opens up a whole world of possibilities for us. Are there some possibilities out there that you're trying to pursue now that really make you feel good inside?
I think it's the idea of having my own podcast because it's a way for me to, connect with other inspiring individuals and spread their light and knowledge with the world and help others become the best versions of themselves.
My favorite thing about having my own podcast is how I can inspire others in the world and to help them to become the best possible individuals that they can be. Now, you knew exactly what I was going to be doing because I told you I was going to be echoing using the echo technique. And I think anybody watching probably noticed Maria's face and the reactions as I echoed back her own words to her. Now, did that feel weird to you at all?
It honestly felt natural, and I realized it's something I think I use, but I wasn't aware of it. I think I just adapted or learned it, but it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I want you, Tony, to tell us why is that useful? Like, why do I benefit from using that technique with others?
Okay, that's a great question. The reason I think that it works is, again, because as I said earlier, the most powerful words that we can give somebody are giving their own words back to them. And what this does for someone is it helps the other person become more heard, become more validated and become more understood. And this is a world where people have short attention spans, and people need this more than ever. And here's the most important thing. And as coaches, we should know this. Most people don't feel that they're listened to. Most people listen to reply and to response. They don't listen to understand. And when we're trying to use this echo technique and trying to learn their own words and repeat those own words back to us, we have to listen. We have to pay attention. And when we're doing that, there's a deeper connection that you feel with the other person. So I think it gives that person a level of understanding, and they can feel that level of understanding, and they feel that you truly understand them. And I think, again, in the way the world is today, I think that's one thing that people want more than anything else in this world, is to feel more understood. So I hope that answers that question. I always say, what if you could be the most fascinating person in the room? And wherever you go, people think that you're the most brilliant, the best conversationalists. And when you use this technique, you automatically become the best conversationalist, because you're learning to use their own words. But more importantly, you're learning to spend more time listening. And when we listen to people, we can find out what makes them tick, and we can help that person to become the best self, to uncover those seeds of greatness and make them be the best person that they can be, and the person that I believe God intended them to be.
Tony, I couldn't imagine a better ending than what you just said right now. It was really touching, actually. And it only makes me think of how grateful I am to have you here with us and to share this with us. So I want to thank you very, very much for today. And before we go, I want to ask you, where can people find you? Why should they, reach out to you? How can you help them?
Well, I have a podcast, and as you know, you've been on it. It's called Strive to Thrive, the Purposely Positive Podcast. If you just Google, it's long enough that you'll find it. Strive to Thrive, the Purposely Positive Podcast. It's about bringing positive content into the world. And I have some amazing guests, just like Maria, who talk about the most amazing topics. So that's the first thing I'd like to invite you to check out the podcast. My website, TonyWCoaching.com, where your greatest success is right in front of you. And that's where you can find me. You can find me on Facebook. I have a Strive to Thrive group, which is actually Strive to Thrive page. Hopefully, Maria, you can put some of these links in the notes. And that would be a great place to connect with me. It's a super fun group. I ask a lot of questions every day to get people to think, and I put videos out there. I just recently did a video series called 15 Days to Uncover Your Best Self. So that's where we really investigate, but we investigate the real you, and the you who you need to show to the world, the you that you need to get up every day and become, the you that can make this world a better place.
I love it. So, you all heard Tony. I definitely recommend to check out his podcast again, Strive to Thrive, the Purposely Positive Podcast. He brings on some really inspiring people with inspiring message and stories. So, that's really nice. And again, definitely check out his Facebook group, his programs. I guess, you've seen today the value that Tony can bring, but also get out of you and, allow you to shine. Well, Tony, what can I say? It's been a pleasure. It's been a blast. And any last words for our listeners?
I just want to thank everybody for being here and for listening. I hope you got one or two things out of this. But again, I hope you'll go out there in the world and continue to make the world a better place. Use these tools to shine your light, and don't take them to the dark side, because the more we give, really, the more we get back. So I'm a firm believer in that. Be like those students in the class that I talked about, and just make somebody's day better.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Well, once more, thank you, Tony. Thank you, dear listeners, for sticking till the end. And I guess I see you all for the next episode of the Coach Tribe podcast. See you and have a wonderful day ahead. Ciao. Hope you enjoyed this episode.
We'll be releasing every Wednesday, so make sure to
Subscribe
and rate us 5 stars where you're listening to this show to give others a chance to discover it too.